Chapter 4. Title is very simple. Now what? So where are we in Ruth's story? Ruth has carried out Naomi's plans with little variation. Boaz has reacted properly and positively. The point of no return has been bridged. Boaz and Ruth have a plan. They're working now together. So now let's look at morning's arrival, or at least thinking about morning's arrival. Verse 14. So she, that's Ruth, lay at his, Boaz, feet until morning and rose before one could recognize another. And he said, let it not be known that the woman came to the threshing floor. So, evidently, Ruth left before dawn in order to avoid being seen and the gossip that would naturally follow if she were seen. The gossip would spread through the small town of Bethlehem like a fire. And it would, of course, shame both Ruth and likely Boaz as well. So they wanted to avoid the appearance of anything improper. But Boaz's comment is curious, the one he made. To whom did he give the instruction about the woman? We don't know. Why was Ruth simply called the woman? We don't know that either. But most importantly, Ruth spent the night at Boaz's feet. Nothing inappropriate is implied in that event. Well, it turns out that before Ruth left, Boaz made sure she was not empty-handed. Verse 15. Again he said, give me the cloak that is on you. It's probably a head scarf or something. They call it a mantle, I believe. And you hold it, the scarf. So she held it, and he measured 6 measures of barley and laid it on her. Probably put it on her head, so they think. Then she went into the city, that is, into Bethlehem. Well, how much was 6 measures? Did you just give her a bit of barley? Well, it turns out that a measure is roughly 10 pounds. So 6 measures would be 60 pounds. That's a lot of barley. As a matter of fact, it's more than she had gleaned on that first day. If you remember, she gleaned what we felt like was a ton of barley. It was 30, 40, maybe even 50 pounds. So this could be as much as twice the barley that she actually gleaned. And he just handed it to her and said, go. Well, where did Ruth go? Well, just where you would suspect that she would go, namely to home and to Naomi. Verse 16. And when she came to her mother-in-law, she said, how did it go, my daughter? And she told her all the things the man had done for her. That how did it go, my daughter? Some people say should be translated, and who are you now? Wanting to know whether, of course, Boaz had agreed to marry her or not. But we'll leave it stand one way or the other. Now note, Ruth spoke of what Boaz had done for her, not to her. Boaz did nothing to her except to lay the barley on her that she would cart home. Then Ruth adds in verse 17, and she said, these 6 measures of barley he, Boaz, gave to me, for he said, do not go to your mother-in-law empty-handed. So Boaz had included Naomi in this process. He had not forgotten Naomi's situation or her need. But interestingly now, even though the plan appears to be working, Naomi cautions Ruth. She said, "Wait, my daughter, until you know how the matter turns out." Remember, the matter was the man who was in front of Boaz to be the kinsman redeemer. So she said, let's just wait until the matter see how it turns out. And for the man, Boaz, will not rest until he's settled it today. So Naomi evidently knew enough about Boaz to be confident that he would act immediately. There would be no procrastination in this matter. But because of the nearer relative's existence, the plan's outcome may be somewhat different than Naomi had planned. Naomi understood, again, that Boaz might not be legally able to act as the lever, the brother-in-law in the lever brother-in-law marriage. Moments like that are times when one should realize the need to wait for the Lord to intervene and work his will. We know that God has providentially cared for both Naomi and Ruth by sending Ruth to Boaz's field and on and on. So we think Yahweh is probably still working here. We know he's still working here. And so Naomi counseled and said, "Hey, let's have a little faith. Let's just wait and see what happens." So it was a time of waiting in faith. Well, the days go on. The day, not days, but that particular day goes on, and so does Boaz. Chapter 4, verse 1. Now Boaz went up to the gate, that's the city gate, and sat down there. And behold, the close relative of whom Boaz spoke was passing by. So he, Boaz, said, "Turn aside, friend, sit down here." And he turned aside and sat down. The other guy, the Redeemer candidate number one, as I call him, showed up at the city gate. That's not really surprising because the city gate was the one way in and out of the city. It was also the place where most of the business got done and was executed. That's where legal proceedings were held. That's where the elders of the city would be found most of the time. So it wasn't surprising that this guy passed by. And Boaz evidently knew that and figured that he would be there because he went, sat down, waited. I use the term other guy because he is unnamed. He's never named in this process. There's probably a couple reasons for that. But in the Hebrew, by the way, the term for friend should really be translated Mr. So-and-so, an obvious attempt to identify someone without identifying him by name. The anonymity that results is appropriate where the man's act might be shameful. How would the man's act be shameful? If he refuses to be the kinsman redeemer, he would be shamed. And he would be shamed at the city gate by the actions of the woman. At least in the case of a refusal to do a levirate marriage. One gets a feeling that Boaz expected Mr. So-and-so to show up at the city gate. We've said that. It's not hard to come by. But the matter also indicates, since he did come by the city gate, and Boaz expected him to come by the city gate, he may not have been a simple peasant level citizen of Bethlehem. He perhaps was a man of some standing in the community, but he remains anonymous, so we don't know much about him. Again, the next step was up to Boaz. So what does Boaz do? Well, let's look at verse 2. Seems to follow verse 1 pretty well. And he, that's Boaz, took 10 men of the elders, those that were around the city gate, took 10 men of the elders of the city and said, "Sit down here." So they sat down and doing what they were asked to do. According to the custom, Boaz secured a contingent, that's the elders, of leading men as witnesses for what was to follow. So Boaz expects to get on with the matter of the kinsman-redeemer relationship with this guy. Well, in matters of dispute and criminal trials, we know that 2 or 3 witnesses were required under Israeli law. We've looked at that before. It was in Deuteronomy 17:6, and you can find the more general statement in Deuteronomy 19:15. So it was likely, why 10? Well, it was likely that 10 constituted a quorum for conducting public business. Later on, 10 became the quorum size for starting a new synagogue, for example. But it also could be that 10 simply represented the notion of completeness or perfection, which 10 did. So we don't know exactly why 10, but there's probably pretty good evidence that Boaz wanted a complete set of witnesses for what he was about to do. So he evidently had a plan of his own once he'd carried out, it's one that he had to carry out methodically, carefully, and it turns out in at least a 2-step fashion or a step-by-step fashion. But it seems that there are probably 2 steps to his action, the first of which we'll look at in this session. In any event, the outcome of what was to follow would be legally binding because it was done publicly with the witnesses. So whatever is decided will be the law. So Boaz began the proceedings with a situation that's unknown to us. He describes a situation that we haven't been told about, but we might have suspected this. It is that Naomi evidently had control of family property. Remember when the property was distributed by Joshua after they took over Canaan, it was expected that the property allotments would stay within the families within the given tribe. And so there were a number of features of the law that were to see to that. So she evidently had control of some property. Where would that property have come from? Well, it would have been in the family since the day Joshua partitioned the land among the 12 tribes. It would have come to Elimelech's family, which may have been probably not, but it could have been before the time of Elimelech even. Got to remember that all of this is taking place during the time of the judges, and it was immediately after, or very close after, the allotments of land to all 12 tribes that the period of judges began. Let's look at verse 3, and we see this about the property. Then he, that's Boaz again, said to the closest relative, Mr. So-and-so, "Naomi, who has come back from the land of Moab, has to sell the piece of land which belonged to our brother Elimelech." So it was property in the Elimelech family holdings, and Naomi evidently had control of it. Now, was she the owner of it? Well, I don't know enough about Israeli law in those days to know whether she owned it or not, but it was to stay in the family of Elimelech as possible. But she, for economic reasons, I assume, felt like she had to sell it. Evidently, she had not yet sold it. But Boaz said she's going to sell it. She has to sell it. So what happens next? Well, there's some interesting quirks here. You don't see it in the scripture, but let me pose what they might look like. First, Elimelech had control of the family property at some time. That's essentially what Boaz said. He said it was property that Elimelech held. When Elimelech died, the property would naturally go to the surviving firstborn son. That would be Mahlon. And if that's the case of what happened, remember, Elimelech did die first. The two boys died later. So Mahlon would have had legal control, it would appear, of that property. But when Mahlon died, Ruth would have had the same say in the matter of the property, except perhaps for the fact that she was a foreigner. And that's probably why Boaz says it's under Naomi's control. She's selling it. So it seems as though Naomi had financial needs and decided to sell the property to meet them. Well, Boaz raised the issue because Naomi's kinsman redeemer was responsible to purchase that land, buy it back if it had already been sold, but in this case, it would be simply to buy it from Naomi, giving her the money that she needed for her own welfare. Well, so what do we have? Well, the kinsman redeemer would be the one to buy it. And again, in Naomi's case, the kinsman redeemer would have the first claim on the property to keep it in the family. And the kinsman redeemer would own the property as long as he wanted to, or until the year of Jubilee, whichever came first. At Jubilee, the land would be returned to Elimelech's family. So Naomi would know that she's not giving up the land forever, but simply till Jubilee. But check this. Boaz made no mention of Ruth in this matter, nor did he mention the notion of a Levirate marriage. Well, what's he up to? He's making it look like it is simply a matter of involving Naomi and her financial need. That's why I'm saying this has obviously got to be step one, because somewhere along the line, the notion of Ruth has to arise. So let's look at verse 4. So I thought to inform you, and this is Boaz speaking still, saying, by it, he's speaking to the first in line guy for the kinsman redeemer role. Buy it before those who are sitting here. In other words, let these people be witnesses that you say you will buy it, and before the elders of my people. Excuse me. If you will redeem it, the land, redeem it. But if not, tell me that I may know, for there is no one but you to redeem it, and I am after you. And he said, let me finish that first part right there. You redeem it, I come after you. You're the one in line. You're the first one in line. If you're going to redeem it, do it. Say to these 10 elders that you will redeem it. And if you do, you do. Good enough. And the Mr. So-and-so said, I will redeem it. Uh-oh. The closest, we got a snag in the plan. It's finally come forward. Remember we said there was a potential snag. Now it appears to have arisen. The closest male relative has agreed to redeem Naomi's property. But now what? Well, understand that we don't know how much the friend knew about Naomi, about Ruth, about the death of Naomi's son, or the marriage of Ruth and Mahlon. We simply don't know what he knew. By the way, when he bought the property from Naomi, if he were to do that, which he says he will, then he essentially also would be under compulsion to have a levirate marriage with Naomi. Make sense? Although Naomi's not in the picture. And if he were to have a levirate marriage with Naomi, there would be no offspring, because remember, Naomi is past the typical age of childbearing. She had said to Ruth and Orpah that, look, I'm not going to have any more sons. Even if I did, you'd have to wait too long, but I'm not going to have any more sons. So the levirate marriage may not be something that Naomi would even want, but technically that was the case for buying it from Naomi. But remember, there's a question of whether Ruth is really the one with control of the property, or should have control of the property. Well, tune in for our next session. What are our takeaways? Well, pretty straightforward. First, not only must impropriety be avoided by the believer, even the appearance of impropriety must be avoided. Remember, the two of Boaz and Ruth went to great lengths to make sure there would be no gossip about this encounter they had. People have confidence in someone who keeps his or her word consistently, just as Naomi had confidence that Boaz would do what he said he would do. The believer's word is part of the believer's witness. Lastly, or I guess thirdly, there are times when one must wait on the Lord in faith. There are times when you would be dangerous to go without direction from the Lord, and that's a matter of faith. And finally, the presence of witnesses is important wherever the outcome of some event is important. We should remember the need for witnesses. If you remember in the Jesus' description of discipline within the church, witnesses were very important in the process. Well, next session, we're going to provide the twist that causes all of this to come out in a positive manner. And we may conclude our study of Ruth with this next session. Depends on whether we can get through all of it or not. But thank you for being here today. I will be pleased to have you join me next time too. Thank you.